What's up guys, Bowie here. So I've been playing a ton of Cyberpunk 2077 lately, and I'm honestly regretting that it took me this long to get on the hype train that this game has become since the post-launch updates. I bought the game a couple years ago, but just could never get past the first 2 to 3 hours of cutscenes and dialogue and get to the actual combat and character progression part of the game. I did finally get there recently though, and I have been having a blast. I play this game on PC through Steam, but most of the time I actually play it with a controller. It just feels more relaxing and also gives me a break from mouse and keyboard since I use those at work every day. I did recently get a Scuff Envision controller, which is a controller specifically designed to use with a PC. It has some extra features such as 4 paddles on the back, 2 side buttons, grips on the handles, and optional trigger stops for shooting games. I'll talk about what I use the paddles and extra side buttons for in a minute, but I absolutely love this controller so far, and I feel like it does a good job of bridging the gap between the more advanced controls that are possible with a mouse and keyboard and the convenience of a controller. I'll leave a link to the controller in the description below if anybody is interested. I'm not sponsored, by the way, I just like the product. So when I got this controller, I wasn't sure what settings I should use. I looked to see what I could find online about what the best controller settings are for Cyberpunk, and the little information I did find had pretty mixed opinions. Since then, I've been messing around with the settings and have basically tried every combination at this point. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on what feels good now. That's what she said. I know a lot of people play this game on the Steam Deck and other handheld PCs as well, so hopefully this is useful for you guys too. Alright, so let's jump into the in-game settings, and I'm mainly going to cover the Controls tab and the Accessibility tab, since these are the ones that have settings related specifically to controller. So let's start off with the Controls tab. This top section here is kind of just general settings. This steering sensitivity, I have never really had an issue with the steering speed for vehicles, and the little note on the right says 100 is recommended for controllers. So I've never messed with this, I've always left it at 100. The inner dead zone, if you don't know how a dead zone works, it's basically the minimum amount that you have to move your stick in order for it to register an input in the game. So if you have an older controller or have stick drift problems, you may need to raise this up a little bit just so your camera isn't kind of drifting. But I have a relatively new controller and don't have any problems with that, so I feel like 0.05 is just a good baseline. The outer dead zone is essentially the same thing, but on the other end. So I think having something here less than 1 feels nice, so you don't have to move your stick all the way far as it'll go to get the maximum input. And then this dodging on movement input keys is for keyboard. So the next setting for the control scheme is one of the most important. If you click the right stick, it'll bring up kind of the controller keybinds. And so there's classic, dynamic, and alternative. So like I mentioned, I have this controller that has paddles on the back and also some side buttons. So I use my left paddle for A, which is jump, and then my right paddle for B, which is crouch and dodge. So if you change from classic to dynamic, what it changes is it puts dodge and dash on B plus left stick, and then crouch is to hold down B. Whereas on classic, you have to double tap the B button to dash. So I don't really like double tapping the paddle. I think it feels a lot better to just press it once. So that's why I prefer this dynamic control scheme. And I don't really find myself crouching that often, so holding down the paddle to crouch feels fine to me. I've never really messed with alternative. It looks like what this does is put the quick melee attack on the left bumper, and then it puts crouch on the right stick. I've never messed with this. I don't find myself meleeing that often either, so I don't really see a need to do that. So I go with dynamic for this. Also, one more thing to mention, the side button on the right side of my controller, I have bound to D-pad up, which is actually kind of an important button in this game because the D-pad up is use item, which is usually your health item that you want to be able to use in combat while you're moving around. And then I also use it to select my quick hacks more easily. Okay, so next are just some vehicle settings. I'm pretty sure all of these are default. I don't think I've messed with these, but you just want to make sure you have hold to fire on because some of the vehicle weapons are semi-automatic, and so you just want to be able to hold down your shoot button instead of having to tap it over and over to shoot those. Next, we've got the first-person camera settings for mouse and the third-person camera settings for mouse, so we're going to skip over those. And then now we come to the first-person camera for controller, which is where most of the changes are that I've made. So, starting with the horizontal sensitivity, I'm at 25 and then I'm at 20 for the vertical sensitivity. I feel like this is pretty fast. It took some getting used to, but I also feel like since this is an open world game and you're running around shooting guns and you're also, steering cars, I think just being able to move your camera quickly just feels good for a game like this. The reason that I have vertical sensitivity at 20 is because if you put them on the same, so for example, if I were to put vertical sensitivity on 25, it just feels like the vertical is faster than the horizontal because there's less kind of range of motion. It's a lot quicker to look up and down than it is to look side to side. So I think having this a few slots lower feels good and kind of makes it feel more consistent. The next thing that I've changed is the zoom sensitivity reduction. So I used to have this on 1, and I'll show you the difference here in just a second. So let's put this down to 1. And if you aren't familiar with this shooting range that I am at, it is at the Kabuki Plaza. This is where it is located on the map. So you can come here and kind of test out guns and test out different controller settings. So 25 feels really good, a good speed to look back and forth. But then with the aiming sensitivity reduction on 1, it feels too quick still. It feels pretty difficult to be precise, whether you want to go for headshots or you want to shoot people that are far away. It's harder to be precise when aiming down sights, it feels like. So I have been testing this with 2 instead of 1, and I personally think it feels much better. It makes the aiming sensitivity a lot slower, and I think it's a lot easier to hit headshots. It's a lot easier to hit enemies that are far away. So I would recommend trying this as well, especially since I have the look sensitivity pretty high up. So the next thing you want to do, and this is very important, this is like the most important part of the settings, is you want to show advanced options. You want to turn this on, and then you want to turn all of these options to 0. I believe on default settings, some of these are turned up a little bit, but you want to turn all of this to 0. The turning bonus, the ramp up time, the delay, all of this stuff just makes your controller feel super inconsistent, like moving your camera and aiming. It just feels really inconsistent and bad, honestly, to me. So I recommended turning all this to 0. The response curve I have messed around with a lot. So raw is basically linear. If you aren't familiar with linear, it makes it so that your camera or your aim is like the same speed all the time, regardless of how fast you're moving your stick. And it just feels really twitchy. I think it feels good in the open world, when you're just looking around or you're driving. I think it feels good. But in terms of having any form of like precision or being able to aim, it's just way too fast when you're aiming down sights, even with that higher reduction of 2 in the sensitivity reduction. So because of that, I basically just stick with recommended. I think it feels, pretty good in all situations. So I would recommend sticking with that as well. And then for the third person camera, I just have the sensitivities on the same as I have up here. And then I have the response curve also on recommended. So last thing is we're going to jump over to the accessibility tab. The top is just some interface stuff, which is all personal preference, subtitles. But then down here under the difficulty section, we have aim assist, which I have on standard, which I believe standard is default. And then I have snap to target on. So I don't really see a point in turning aim assist off. I think it just makes using a controller not very enjoyable and just way too difficult. If you're on an older controller and have trouble aiming, then you could turn the aim assist up to substantial to make it a little bit easier for you. But I really like just having it on standard. And I've also left it on standard for the melee combat as well as aim assist on vehicle combat. I have turned these camera motions off. I think it feels better to just, not have the camera moving around when it doesn't need to. And then on weapon sway, I've also changed this to just on weapon. Finally, down here we have the controller vibration. I have this on 0. I've never enjoyed playing with controller vibration in any game, really. I don't feel like it really adds to the immersion or the experience, and it kind of just feels annoying to me. Same with the haptic feedback. I tried playing this game originally with a regular PS5 controller, which does have the haptic feedback, and I did not like that at all. It kind of feels like the triggers are pushing back against you when you're trying to press them to shoot, and I just think it feels terrible. And then this weapon cycling is just personal preference, kind of based on what kind of build you're using, is whether you want to turn that on or not. And that's going to do it for the controller settings. Let me know in the comments if you guys try these out and like them, or if there are other controller settings that you like better. After I finish the main game and the Phantom Liberty DLC, I'm planning to make a full review on the game and why it's still getting better over 4 years after the initial release date. I'm also planning to make a video on some of my favorite builds that I've tried in the game so far, so please subscribe if you are interested in seeing those videos soon. Also, don't forget to like the video, it helps me out a lot, and I hope you all have a great day. Peace.